A simple request for a glass of water. That's all it was. But on Global Wings Flight 710 from New York to London, this simple request would ignite a firestorm at 35,000 feet. It was a clash not of strangers, but of prejudice, against dignity, of entitlement, against excellence. What one flight attendant intended as an act of casual cruelty, the pilot transformed into a moment of stunning public justice. But the story doesn't end when the plane lands. The universe keeps its own ledger, and the final bill when it came due was devastatingly real and deeply ironic. The cabin of Global Wings Flight 710 was a familiar symphony of controlled chaos. The low guttural hum of the Rolls-Royce Trent engines, the crisp clicks of overhead bins, closing the murmur of 100 conversations, blending into a single placid drone. For Dr. Samuel Parker, it was white noise, a temporary cocoon separating him from the demanding world of cardiovascular science he inhabited. He settled into his seat, 24B, an aisle seat in the premium economy cabin he'd chosen for the extra legroom on the 7-hour journey to London. At 63, Dr. Parker wore his distinction with a quiet grace. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark suit, though slightly rumpled from the airport rush, was impeccably tailored. In his worn leather briefcase sat the culmination of a decade's work, a keynote address for the London Global Health Summit on innovative non-invasive techniques for aortic valve repair. He was not just a speaker, he was the guest of honor, a titan in his field. But in seat 24B, he was just another passenger, a man hoping for an uneventful flight. The boarding process was nearing its end when Bella Jenkins began her pre-flight checks in the premium economy cabin. As the senior purser, Bella carried herself with an air of brittle authority. With over 20 years of service, she viewed the aircraft as her personal domain, and the passengers as a rotating cast of minor irritants. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe shellacked bun, and her smile, when she chose to deploy it, never quite reached her cold, pale blue eyes. Dr. Parker, feeling the familiar dryness of cabin air, caught her eye as she passed. "Excuse me, miss," he asked, his voice calm and polite. Bella paused, her posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. She looked at him, her gaze flicking over his dark skin, his well-tailored suit, and landing on his face with a look of bored impatience. "Yes." The word was clipped sterile. "May I please have a glass of water before takeoff?" It was a standard request, one she had fulfilled thousands of times. But today something in her recoiled. She offered a tight, dismissive smile. "Pre-departure beverage service is complete. You'll have to wait until we're in the air." She turned and walked away before he could respond, leaving Dr. Parker in a cloud of her sharp floral perfume and quiet disbelief. He watched as not 10 seconds later, she stopped at seat 22D and offered a man with a flushed, ruddy face a fresh glass of orange juice with a warm, "There you go, sir. Anything to make you more comfortable." Dr. Parker felt a familiar, weary pang. It was not anger, not yet. It was the dull ache of 1,000 similar slights, a lifetime of being treated as an afterthought, an inconvenience. He was a man who could restart a human heart with his bare hands, who commanded auditoriums of the world's brightest medical minds. Yet in this metal tube, hurtling through the sky, he was rendered invisible by a simple request for water. He chose not to challenge her. A confrontation would solve nothing. It would only escalate the tension, making the next 7 hours unbearable. He was a man of immense patience, a quality honed over countless hours in the operating room. He would wait. As the plane taxied to the runway, a younger flight attendant named Chloe, her face open and earnest, moved through the cabin with a tray of hot towels. When she reached Dr. Parker, she offered him one with a genuine smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice imbued with a warmth that had been absent in his exchange with Bella. "Of course, sir," Chloe replied. "Can I get you anything else? Just a glass of water when you have a moment after we reach cruising altitude." "Thank you, Chloe," he said, glancing at her name tag. The simple act of her using his title, Sir, and her kind demeanour, was a small balm on the fresh wound of Bella's dismissal. Chloe nodded brightly. "I'll bring it right to you as soon as the seatbelt sign is off." Dr. Parker watched her move down the aisle, her youthful energy a stark contrast to Bella's rigid control. He saw Bella watching Chloe, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. A silent power dynamic was at play, and Dr. Parker had the distinct feeling that he had just become an unwitting pawn in it. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and felt the powerful thrust of the engines as Flight 710 roared into the New York night sky, leaving the city's glittering skyline behind. The drama he suspected was only just beginning. The ascent was smooth, and soon the plane leveled out at 35,000 feet, a silver dart sailing through the inky blackness above the Atlantic. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin slowly came to life. Chloe, true to her word, appeared at Dr. Parker's elbow almost immediately, with a glass of chilled water on a small tray. "Here you are, sir," she said with another warm smile. "Thank you so much, Chloe. I appreciate it," he replied sincerely. As Chloe turned to leave, Bella's voice sliced through the cabin's low hum from the galley. "Chloe, stocking check now." The tone was sharp, an undisguised reprimand. Chloe's smile faltered, and she scurried away, casting a quick, apologetic glance back at Dr. Parker. The incident was not lost on the other passengers. In seat 24A, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, no relation to Bella, lowered her laptop slightly. A sharp-eyed business analyst who missed very little, she had seen the initial snub with the water, and now this. She made a mental note, her mind cataloguing the interaction with the same precision she applied to market data. An hour later, the dinner service began. Bella and Chloe worked the cart from the front of the premium economy cabin. Bella's voice was a saccharine melody as she addressed the white passengers. "The chicken or the pasta tonight, sir?" "An excellent choice, madam. Would you care for a Chardonnay with that?" When the cart reached row 24, Bella addressed Sarah in 24A first. "Ma'am, chicken or pasta?" "I'll have the chicken, please," Sarah said, watching the purser's face carefully. Bella then turned her body, angling the cart, so it almost bypassed Dr. Parker entirely. She looked past him, towards the passenger in the row behind. Dr. Parker had to clear his throat to get her attention. "Excuse me. I believe it's my turn." Bella turned back to him slowly, her expression one of exaggerated surprise, as if she hadn't realized he was there. "Oh, right. What do you want?" The politeness she had offered everyone else had evaporated. The question was flat, devoid of courtesy. "I will have the chicken as well, please," he said, his voice even. Bella looked down at her remaining trays, a small triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "We're out of the chicken, only pasta left." It was a blatant lie. Sarah in 24A had just taken the second-to-last chicken dish on the top rack of the cart. There were at least 3 more clearly visible on the rack below it. Chloe, standing behind Bella, saw them too. Her eyes widened slightly, and she made a small, almost imperceptible movement to point them out. But a glacial stare from Bella froze her in place. The cabin seemed to grow quieter. Sarah stared, her mouth agape at the audacity. The man in 23B, who had been engrossed in a movie, had taken off his headphones and was watching the exchange. Dr. Parker held Bella's gaze for a long moment. He could see the chicken. She knew he could see the chicken. It was a power play, a deliberate and petty act of humiliation. He could have pointed, argued, created a scene that would have made everyone uncomfortable. But that was her goal. She wanted a reaction, a justification for her prejudice. She wanted him to be the angry black man. He would not give her the satisfaction. With a slow, deliberate nod, he broke the tension. "The pastor will be fine, thank you." His composure seemed to disarm Bella more than any outburst would have. Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. She practically slammed the tray of pasta onto his table, slopping a bit of marinara sauce onto the foil lid. She moved on without offering him a drink or a bread roll. It was Chloe who circled back a moment later, her face etched with apology. "Sir, I am so sorry," she whispered quickly, handing him a bread roll and a small bottle of red wine. "Would you like some wine on the house?" "Thank you, Chloe. That's very kind," Dr. Parker said, giving her a reassuring look. "It's all right." But it wasn't all right. The meal was a physical manifestation of the disrespect he was being shown. The pasta was lukewarm, the bread roll cold. He ate a few bites, his appetite gone, the injustice leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Across the aisle, Sarah Jenkins quietly opened a new document on her laptop. She typed the date, the flight number, and began to log the events. She noted the time, the names on the crew's badges, and a detailed, dispassionate account of what she had witnessed: the initial water request, the public reprimand of the junior attendant, the blatant lie about the meal service. She had a feeling this log might become important. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. The placid drone had been replaced by a quiet, simmering tension, and at its center was Bella Jenkins, a woman who seemed determined to make the journey as hostile as possible for one specific passenger. As the flight wore on, the cabin lights were dimmed and most passengers settled in to sleep or watch movies. Dr. Parker tried to review his notes for the conference, but the words on the page blurred his mind, replaying the quiet aggressions he had endured. It was more than just poor service. It was a deliberate campaign of erasure, an attempt to make him feel insignificant. He was feeling a chill, a common occurrence on long-haul flights. He looked for a blanket in the overhead bin, but his assigned space was already full. He saw Bella moving through the darkened cabin, her silhouette stark against the glow of the galley lights. He decided to give her one last chance to perform her duties with basic human decency. He pressed the call button. A few moments passed. The light above his seat remained illuminated, a small beacon of his request. He saw Bella glance at it from the galley, then deliberately turn her back and begin wiping down a clean counter. She was ignoring him. He waited another 5 minutes before pressing it again. This time, Chloe started to emerge from the galley, but Bella put a hand on her arm, stopping her. They exchanged hushed, tense words. Chloe looked distressed, while Bella's expression was one of cold fury. Finally, Bella herself marched down the aisle, her footsteps heavy and loud in the quiet cabin. She arrived at his seat, not leaning down to speak to him discreetly, as protocol dictated, but standing over him, her arms crossed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a distinct edge that caused nearby passengers to stir. "Yes," Dr. Parker said, keeping his own voice low. "I was wondering if I could get a blanket. I'm feeling rather cold." Bella let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a sound of pure contempt. "Blankets are for our first class and business class passengers first. If there are any left over, we distribute them here. There are none left." Again, it was a demonstrable lie. Sarah, in 24A, had a spare, still-wrapped blanket sitting on her empty middle seat. More damningly, from his aisle seat, Dr. Parker could see directly into the galley storage, where the corner of a neat stack of blue, plastic-wrapped blankets was clearly visible. This was the final straw. This wasn't just neglect. It was a targeted, malicious denial of a basic comfort, delivered with a sneer. The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it could no longer be ignored. "Miss," Dr. Parker said, his voice losing its patient edge and gaining a core of steel. "I can see a stack of blankets in the galley from right here. I am a paying passenger in this cabin, and I am asking you for a blanket." The direct challenge seemed to stun Bella. Her face flushed a blotchy red. Her composure cracked, and the ugly prejudice simmering beneath the surface boiled over. "People like you are always wanting something extra." She hissed her voice, a venomous whisper that was none the less audible to the surrounding rows. "Always so demanding. This isn't your private jet." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The cabin, already tense, fell into a shocked silence. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting the exact quote. The man in 23B gasped audibly. Even in the dim light, the racial animus was impossible to miss. Dr. Parker felt a cold, sharp anger, but his discipline held. He would not be goaded into a shouting match. He looked at her. His eyes filled not with rage, but with a profound, weary disappointment. "Your behavior," he said slowly and clearly, "is not only unprofessional, it is deeply offensive. I will not be spoken to this way." Just then, Chloe, who had watched the entire exchange with horror, could stay silent no longer. She rushed forward with a blanket in her hand. "Bella, please." "Here, sir. Take this one." Bella whirled on her. "You will go back to the galley, and you will stay there until I tell you to move. You are a trainee. You know nothing." She snarled, snatching the blanket from Chloe's hand and shoving it back towards the galley. Chloe looked as though she had been struck, her eyes welling with tears as she retreated. That was it. The public humiliation of a subordinate, the overt racism, the repeated lies. It had crossed a line from which there was no return. Dr. Parker knew he had to escalate the situation, but not in the way Bella expected. He would not yell or demand to see her manager. He would be strategic. He was, after all, a surgeon. He knew the value of precision. He caught Chloe's eye as she stood, trembling at the edge of the galley. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. He waited a few moments, then calmly stood up, took a pen and a business card from his wallet, and walked towards the front of the plane, towards the cockpit. He was no longer just a passenger. He was Dr. Samuel Parker, and he was about to make a professional complaint. The cockpit door was a formidable barrier, the symbolic and literal separation between the passengers and the ultimate authority on the aircraft. Dr. Parker didn't knock. Instead, he waited near the forward galley, catching Chloe's attention again. "Young lady," he said softly, so Bella couldn't overhear. "Could you do me a favor? I don't wish to cause a scene, but I need to have a word with the captain. Could you please pass a note to him for me?" Chloe's eyes were wide, with a mixture of fear and resolve. She had seen the injustice, and her own humiliation at Bella's hands was still fresh. She nodded, her chin trembling slightly. "Yes, sir, of course." Dr. Parker scribbled a quick, discreet message on the back of his business card. "Captain, I am a passenger in seat 24B. I need to report a serious and ongoing issue with the senior purser's conduct. It requires your immediate attention. Dr. Samuel Parker." He folded it and passed it to her. Chloe took the card, her fingers brushing his, and disappeared through the galley curtain. A minute later, she slipped through the cockpit door. The tension in the front of the plane was thick enough to taste. Bella watched from the other side of the galley, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, sensing a shift in the power dynamic she had fought so hard to control. 5 long minutes passed. Then the cockpit door opened, but it wasn't the first officer who emerged. It was the captain himself. Captain Robert "Rob" Miller was in his late 50s, a man with the calm, steady demeanor of someone who had spent 30 years landing multi-ton machines in crosswinds. He had kind eyes, but they were currently set in a face that was a mask of grim professionalism. He didn't immediately address Dr. Parker. Instead, his presence alone commanded the attention of the cabin crew. "Bella," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut effortlessly through the cabin noise. "Status report. Everything is secure and on schedule, Captain," Bella replied, snapping into a posture of formal deference. Her tone, however, couldn't quite mask her surprise at his appearance. Captain Miller's eyes swept over the cabin, then landed on Dr. Parker, who was standing patiently nearby. He gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement. Then he turned his gaze back to Bella. "I'm going to have a brief chat with a passenger. I want you to continue with your duties. Is that clear?" "Yes, Captain," she said, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. Captain Miller beckoned Dr. Parker towards the small, semi-private area just outside the cockpit. "Dr. Parker, I'm Captain Miller. Please tell me what's going on." Dr. Parker recounted the events calmly and factually, starting with the refused water and ending with the public racially charged insult and the deliberate withholding of the blanket. He did not embellish or editorialize. He simply presented the facts, his voice steady and measured. The power of his testimony was in its quiet, undeniable truth. As he spoke, Captain Miller's expression hardened. The lines around his eyes deepened, not with skepticism, but with a growing controlled anger. He was a veteran pilot who believed his aircraft was a sanctuary of safety and respect. An attack on a passenger was an attack on the integrity of his command. When Dr. Parker finished, the captain was silent for a moment. "Dr. Parker, on behalf of Global Wings Airlines, and as the commander of this flight, I want to offer you my most sincere and unreserved apology. This kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable. It will not be tolerated on my aircraft. Ever." He glanced through the curtain into the cabin where Bella was now pretending to be busy, though her attention was clearly fixed on them. "I saw the call button from your seat on the monitor. It was on for nearly 6 minutes. Captain Miller said, his voice low and tight with fury. "And I was briefed by the junior attendant on what she witnessed. Your account confirms the worst of it." He looked back at Dr. Parker. "I am going to handle this, I assure you. Please return to your seat. I will address the situation in a way that I hope will restore some measure of your comfort and dignity for the remainder of this flight." There was an ironclad certainty in the captain's voice. Dr. Parker, for the first time that night, felt a sense of relief. He had been heard. He had been believed. He nodded. "Thank you, Captain." He walked back to seat 24B, the eyes of several passengers following him. Sarah Jenkins gave him a small, supportive nod. Bella watched him pass a look of triumphant contempt on her face, wrongly assuming her authority had won out, that the captain had simply placated an unruly passenger. She had no idea that Captain Robert Miller was not a man for placating. He was a man of action, and he was about to take command of his cabin in a way no one, least of all Bella Jenkins, would ever forget. "Doctor." Parker had been back in his seat for no more than 10 minutes when the cabin speakers crackled to life, silencing the low hum of the engines and the soft taps of laptop keys. It was the kind of interruption that signaled either turbulence or a significant announcement. Every passenger paused. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Captain Miller's voice filled the cabin, but it wasn't his usual calm, folksy tone used for reporting weather patterns over Newfoundland. This voice was different. It was imbued with a formal, resonant gravity that commanded absolute attention. "We are currently cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet, and our arrival in London Heathrow is still on schedule. However, I am making this unscheduled announcement tonight to acknowledge a very special guest we have the privilege of flying with us on Global Wings 710. A ripple of curiosity went through the cabin. Passengers looked around, wondering if a celebrity was on board. Bella, who had been standing near the galley, froze. This was highly unusual. Captains rarely made such announcements. "It has been brought to my attention," Captain Miller continued, his voice slow and deliberate, "that we have on board a passenger who exemplifies the very best of human endeavor and service. This man is a pioneer, a leader, and a lifesaver." Dr. Parker's heart began to beat a little faster. He had a sudden shocking premonition of what was about to happen. "This evening, I would like to personally and publicly recognize Dr. Samuel Parker, seated in 24B. A collective gasp went through the surrounding rows. All eyes turned to Dr. Parker. Sarah Jenkins's face broke into a wide, astonished grin. Bella Jenkins's face, however, went slack with shock, the color draining from it until it was ashen. For those of you who may not be familiar with his work, the captain's voice boomed. Dr. Parker is one of the world's foremost cardiothoracic surgeons. He is the chief of innovation at the Parker Cardiovascular Institute, and he is flying to London tonight to deliver the keynote address at the Global Health Summit, an event where he will be sharing a revolutionary surgical technique that is expected to save thousands of lives. The passengers were now openly staring, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe and respect. A few began to whisper amongst themselves, pulling out phones to Google his name. The man in 23B, who had witnessed the blanket incident, now looked at Bella with undisguised contempt. "The crew and I," Captain Miller's voice hardened almost imperceptibly, "are humbled to have such a distinguished guest on our flight. Dr. Parker, your work honors us all, and we are proud to be flying you to London for such a momentous occasion." Then came the masterstroke. Therefore, for the remainder of the flight, Dr. Parker is to be considered the guest of honor of Global Wings. All amenities, beverages, and services are, of course, complimentary. To my cabin crew, you will ensure that Dr. Parker's every need is met with the utmost priority and respect for the duration of this flight. He is to be afforded every comfort we can provide. The message was unmistakable. It was not just an honor for Dr. Parker. It was a direct, public, and devastating rebuke of Bella. The captain had not named her, had not mentioned her behavior, but in elevating Dr. Parker, he had exposed her prejudice for all to see. He had used his authority not as a hammer, but as a spotlight, illuminating the dignity of the man she had tried to diminish. "Thank you," the captain concluded, his voice returning to a more normal register. "We'll have you on the ground in London shortly. Enjoy the rest of your flight." The speaker clicked off. For a beat, there was silence. Then, a passenger in the row ahead of Dr. Parker turned around and began to applaud. Another joined in. Then another. Soon the entire premium economy cabin, and even some from the economy section behind, erupted in a spontaneous, heartfelt round of applause. It was for Dr. Parker for his work, but it was also for the captain, for justice, and for the simple, powerful act of decency. Dr. Parker was overwhelmed, a modest man, unused to such public displays. He gave a small, dignified nod of thanks to the people around him. His eyes, however, sought out Bella. She stood frozen, a statue of humiliation. Her face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. Every clap was a hammer blow to her ego. She had tried to make him feel small and invisible, and in response, the captain had made him the most important person on the plane. She was trapped, forced to stand there and absorb the public celebration of the very man she had scorned. The flight was far from over, but for Senior Purser, Bella Jenkins, her career was already in a nosedive, and she was about to crash. The applause, when it finally subsided, left a ringing silence in its wake. It was a silence thick with judgment, a vacuum where Bella Jenkins's authority used to be. For the next 3 hours, Flight 710 was no longer her domain. It was a theater of her quiet humiliation, and she was its unwilling star. The very air in the cabin seemed to have changed. The recycled oxygen felt heavy, charged with the lingering electricity of the captain's announcement. Bella stood rooted to the spot near the forward galley, the forced smile she'd worn earlier, now completely gone, replaced by a pallid mask of disbelief. Her mind, usually a fortress of procedures and regulations, was a maelstrom of chaotic thoughts. It was a mutiny. The captain, her captain, had sided with him, the passenger. He hadn't just undermined her. He had publicly vivisected her, laying her bare for the entire cabin to see. In her 20 years of flying, she had never witnessed such a thing. It was a gross violation of protocol, a betrayal. Yet deep beneath the rage, a cold, slithering tendril of fear began to coil in her stomach. It was Chloe who moved first, breaking the spell. The younger flight attendant seemed to have grown 3 inches taller. The timidity was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined confidence. She walked directly to Dr. Parker, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Dr. Parker," she said, her voice clear and respectful, audible to the surrounding rows. "May I get you anything at all? We have a selection of fine wines from the business class cabin, or perhaps a glass of champagne, to celebrate a fresh pillow, a warmer blanket. It would be my honor. Just a simple coffee would be wonderful, Chloe." "Thank you," he replied, his voice a balm of calm in the tense cabin. He gave her a smile that was not just for her, but an acknowledgement of her own quiet courage in the face of Bella's tyranny. As Chloe turned to prepare the coffee, she glanced at Bella. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a cool professionalism. "Bella," she said, her tone even, "could you please handle the final trash collection in the rear of the cabin? I'll attend to Dr. Parker and the other passengers up front." It was a simple, operational directive, the kind Bella had issued to her 1,000 times. But coming from Chloe now, it was a seismic shift in power. Bella's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in her cheek, but she couldn't refuse. The captain's orders had been explicit. Ensure Dr. Parker's every need is met with the utmost priority and respect. By empowering Chloe to serve him, the captain had, by extension, endorsed her authority in this specific matter. Wordlessly, Bella grabbed a trash bag and began the walk of shame to the back of the plane. Every step was agony. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, but she could feel the gazes of the passengers like physical blows. They whispered as she passed. They would lean into the aisle, watch her, and then turn to their companions, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. She was no longer Senior Purser Jenkins, a figure of authority. She was a spectacle. Meanwhile, Dr. Parker had become a quiet celebrity. The woman who was an ER nurse came forward and spoke to him in hushed, reverent tones. "Dr. Parker, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I had to say, your paper on percutaneous mitral valve repair was required reading for my entire cardiology rotation. It's an honor to meet you." The businessman in 23B, a corporate lawyer, discreetly passed him a business card. "Sir," he murmured, "my name is Arthur Vance. I witnessed everything. If the airline gives you any trouble, or if you need a formal witness for any reason, that's my personal cell. What she did was unacceptable. What the captain did was magnificent." Sarah Jenkins, the analyst in 24A, continued to type her face, illuminated by the glow of her screen. She was no longer just taking notes. She was drafting a narrative, a detailed chronological account of the evening's events, complete with direct quotes and observations. She knew a powerful story of corporate accountability when she saw one, and she intended to share it. Bella saw all of this from the corner of her eye. She saw the respect, the admiration, the deference being shown to the man she had deemed unworthy of a blanket. Each quiet conversation, each handshake was another nail in her professional coffin. Her bitterness curdled into a desperate, frantic need to reassert herself. When she returned to the galley, she tried to resume her duties, to act as if nothing had happened. She began preparing the landing drinks tray, her movements jerky and aggressive. About an hour before their scheduled arrival, Captain Miller's imposing figure appeared once more. He strode purposefully down the aisle, his presence silencing the cabin again. He bypassed the galley, offering Bella not even a peripheral glance, and stopped directly at Dr. Parker's seat. "Dr. Parker, I wanted to personally check in again," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "Has the remainder of your flight been to your satisfaction?" "Immensely so, Captain." "Thank you," Dr. Parker said, standing slightly to shake the captain's hand. "Your intervention was more than I could have ever expected. It was a profound lesson in integrity." "It was simply my duty to maintain the integrity of this aircraft and the dignity of everyone on board," Captain Miller replied, his gaze sweeping coolly over the cabin before briefly landing on Bella. The unspoken message was clear. "I want to reassure you that a full, detailed report will be filed the moment we are on the ground. This incident will be escalated to the highest levels of corporate affairs and human resources at Global Wings. You will be contacted by a senior vice president from our New York office within 24 hours. This will be handled, Doctor. I give you my word." It was a final public confirmation that what had happened was not merely a customer service issue, but a grave professional breach with serious consequences. Bella, who had been listening from the galley, felt a fresh wave of cold dread. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist. This was the end of her career. As the plane began its final descent into London, the mood shifted to one of quiet anticipation. The lights of the city suburbs blinked through the clouds. When the wheels touched the tarmac at Heathrow with a gentle screech, a palpable sense of finality settled over the passengers. But Captain Miller had one last act in his play. As the plane taxied towards the gate, his voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been switched off. We have one additional request this morning. We ask that you please remain in your seats for a few extra moments to allow our guest of honor, Dr. Parker, to disembark first, so he may proceed to his important summit without delay." It was the ultimate gesture of respect, a final public affirmation of Dr. Parker's status. When the jet bridge connected with a dull thud and the cabin door hissed open, it was not the usual stream of first-class passengers who moved to exit. Everyone remained seated. All eyes were on Dr. Parker and the front of the aircraft. A man in a sharply tailored Global Wings ground uniform stepped aboard. His name tag read, "David Chen Duty Manager." His expression was grim and all business. He surveyed the cabin, his eyes finding Bella immediately. "Senior Purser Jenkins." He asked, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. "Yes," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am the Heathrow Duty Manager. Captain Miller has logged a priority complaint. I will need you to accompany me to the Airline Operations Center for a formal debriefing as soon as you are clear of your post-flight cabin duties. Your entire crew will be required to give statements." He then turned to the other two flight attendants. "Chloe Maria, you will report to briefing room 3. Your union representative has been contacted and is en route to meet you." The distinction was surgical. Bella was being escorted for an investigation. The others were being treated as witnesses. The passengers in the front rows saw it all, their expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and fascination. Bella's walk of shame was about to begin. As Dr. Parker gathered his briefcase, the passengers in his cabin gave him a final, quiet nod of respect. He walked towards the exit, the aisle parting for him. At the door, Captain Miller was waiting. "Doctor," he said, his hand extended. "Again, I am profoundly sorry for the circumstances of your journey with us tonight." Dr. Parker took the captain's hand. It was a firm, resolute grip. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Captain," he replied, his voice filled with sincere gratitude. "You turned a disgraceful situation into an unforgettable display of leadership. Thank you." With a final nod, Dr. Parker stepped off the plane and into the bright, bustling terminal of Heathrow Airport, leaving the wreckage of a 20-year career and a thoroughly dismantled tyrant behind him. The story on Flight 710 was over. But the universe, with its unerring sense of irony, was just beginning to write the final devastating chapter. The 6 months that followed the disastrous landing at Heathrow were not a period of healing for Bella Jenkins. They were a slow, agonizing amputation of her life. The debriefing in the sterile, windowless operations center had been the beginning of the end. It wasn't a discussion, it was an indictment. Captain Miller's report was a masterpiece of damning, factual prose. Chloe's statement, delivered through tears, but with unshakable conviction, corroborated every detail. And then came the file thick with printouts of emails from passengers. The airline had been inundated. The lawyer Arthur Vance had sent a scathing letter. The ER nurse had written about the disgrace to professionalism. Worst of all was a multi-page printout of a LinkedIn post authored by a Sarah Jenkins senior market analyst. It had gone viral within the business and travel communities. The article, titled "A Lesson in Leadership at 35,000 Feet," detailed the entire incident with the cold precision of a legal brief. It didn't name Bella, but it didn't have to. It listed the flight number, the date, and the title, "Senior Purser," along with meticulous time-stamped descriptions of her behavior. It lauded Dr. Parker's quiet dignity and Captain Miller's decisive intervention. The post had been shared over 50,000 times with a comment section filled with outrage and praise for the captain. Global Wings Airlines wasn't just dealing with an internal complaint. They were fighting a public relations inferno. Bella was placed on indefinite suspension and sent home. The termination call came 10 days later. It was a cold, 5-minute conversation with a man from Human Resources she'd never met. He read from a script citing gross misconduct, violation of the company's code of conduct, and irreparable damage to the airline's reputation. Her 2 decades of loyalty of crisp uniforms and perfect service, as she saw it, were erased by an algorithm of corporate damage control. Her world, once as expansive as the airline's route map, shrank to the 4 walls of her Queen's condo. The first month was a blur of shock and denial. The second was a storm of rage. She tried to find another job, but the industry was a tight-knit community. The story of Flight GW710 was legendary. No one would touch her. She was blacklisted a pariah. Friends from work who once feared her sharp tongue but respected her seniority now crossed the street to avoid her. Their silence was the most damning verdict of all. She spent her days stewing in a toxic brew of self-pity and venomous resentment. In her narrative, she was the martyr, sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. She obsessed over Dr. Samuel Parker, his name a curse on her lips. She Googled him endlessly, her stomach churning, as she read articles praising his latest medical breakthrough, or saw photos of him at charity galas. She saw him not as a man she had wronged, but as the architect of her ruin, a cunning, entitled passenger who had played the victim to perfection and manipulated a weak-willed captain. Her prejudice didn't vanish. It metastasized, convincing her that his success was proof of an unjust world where men like him were given everything. Dr. Parker, for his part, was utterly oblivious to the vortex of Bella's life. The incident on the flight, while unpleasant, had been swiftly and justly handled by Captain Miller. He had received a personal call of apology from the CEO of Global Wings and a generous voucher for future travel, which he donated to a medical charity. The London summit was a triumph, and the Parker method was now being taught in the top medical schools, from Johns Hopkins to the Charité in Berlin. His life was a symphony of purpose, intricate surgeries, grateful patients, and the quiet satisfaction of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The memory of the angry flight attendant had faded into a minor, insignificant anecdote. The only person who still anchored Bella to a sense of normalcy was her father. Frank Jenkins, a retired fire battalion chief, was a man of quiet strength and simple routines. He was the one person whose love for her was unconditional. After her firing, he was her staunchest defender, swallowing her twisted version of events and railing against the ungrateful corporation that had cast his daughter aside. His small house in the suburbs became her only refuge. The first sign of trouble was subtle. Frank, a man who could once haul 200 feet of fire hose up 6 flights of stairs, started getting winded walking to his mailbox. Then came a dizzy spell while tending his roses. Bella dismissed it as old age until the day she got the call from her sister. Frank had collapsed. His heart. The diagnosis at the local hospital was a death sentence delivered in calm, clinical terms: severe degenerative aortic stenosis with extreme concentric calcification. The valve was failing, and the calcium deposits were so thick and brittle they encased his aortic root like cement. A standard valve replacement is out of the question, the young cardiologist explained, pointing to blurry images on a screen. A surgical approach would be like trying to operate on a piece of porcelain. It would shatter. A transcatheter valve replacement, or TVR, is also too risky. The calcification extends to the coronary arteries. Deploying a new valve could dislodge a plaque, causing a fatal heart attack on the table, or it could fracture the aortic annulus entirely. I'm sorry, but his condition is inoperable. Bella felt the floor drop out from under her. Her father, her rock, was being condemned to palliative care. No, she insisted, the old fire flashing in her eyes. There has to be another option. A specialist, a trial, something. Her desperation moved the cardiologist, a kind man named Dr. Peterson. He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Look, 99 out of 100 surgeons would say the same thing I have. But there is one person, a pioneer. He's been developing a new technique for cases exactly like this, the so-called inoperable ones. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through Bella. Who is he? Where can we find him? He's not just a surgeon. He's more of an artist, a sculptor. Dr. Peterson continued, his voice tinged with awe. He uses advanced intravascular lithotripsy sonic waves to gently fracture and break down the calcium deposits before attempting to place the new valve. It's radical, incredibly high risk, but he's having success where no one else can. His institute is here in New York, but he has a year-long waiting list. Given the urgency, I can send a referral, but it's the longest of long shots. Do it, Bella commanded, her voice raw. Whatever it takes. What's his name? Dr. Peterson nodded, turning his monitor towards her so she could see the referral page. He's the only real chance your father has, he said softly. Bella leaned forward, her eyes scanning the screen for the name of her father's potential savior. And then she saw it. First, the professional headshot, a distinguished, kind-faced black man with intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring smile. Then, the name printed in bold, clinical font beneath it. Dr. Samuel Parker, founder and Chief of Surgery, Parker Cardiovascular Institute. Time stopped. The sterile air in the consultation room seemed to crackle and burn. The name, the face, it was him. The man from seat 24B. The man she had tormented. The man whose name she had cursed every day for 6 months. The world tilted violently. Bella gripped the arms of her chair to keep from falling. A dizzying, nauseating montage of images assaulted her mind, her own thin, cruel smile as she denied him water. The sight of the chicken dinners she'd lied about, the sneer on her face as she refused him a blanket, her venomous words, "People like you," hanging in the air like poison gas. She heard the echo of the captain's voice over the PA system, followed by the thunderous applause that had signaled the end of her world. Her sister, oblivious, squinted at the screen. "Parker. He looks so familiar. I think I saw him on the news." Bella couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. She was drowning in the crushing cosmic weight of an irony so profound, so perfectly sculpted, it felt like a divine punishment. She had tried to deny a man his basic dignity to make him feel small and powerless. And now the universe, with its unforgiving and meticulous ledger, had placed her father's fragile, beating heart directly into that very man's hands. He was no longer just the man she had wronged. He was the one man on earth she had to beg to save a life she held dearer than her own. Her reckoning had finally truly arrived. The story ends there, in the deafening silence of that waiting room, with a life hanging in the balance. We don't know if Dr. Parker recognized her or what he chose to do. But in that single moment, Bella Jenkins was forced to confront the full devastating weight of her actions. She, who had judged a man by the color of his skin, now faced him as a brilliant surgeon, the one person standing between her father and the grave. It's a powerful real-life parable about how the universe keeps its own accounts. An act of casual cruelty on a transatlantic flight resulted in a reckoning of the most personal and ironic kind. It reminds us that the dignity we afford others is not just a courtesy, but a reflection of our own character, and a debt that is always eventually paid in full. Have you ever witnessed a moment of instant karma? Let us know your story in the comments below. If this journey of prejudice, justice, and profound consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible real-life dramas. Thank you for listening.